Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 175th episode. That is a typo in the title card. That is on me. I did not realize until I checked this morning. And I talked to Chris about it, and he was like, I already did a bunch of editing on that clip. I was like, okay, so we're just going to live with it. But we are here with Nick and the captain of the podcast True Crime Garage. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey guys.
This is very exciting for us.
Super excited.
And we're here to talk about one of the things we're going to talk about is the Brian Shaffer case. We're also going to talk about our personal crime-solving abilities, what we think of that. We're talking about what we think would be an interesting case to sit on the jury for. And we're going to wrap it up with a conspiracy theory about the Kennedys that we'll get to later. But before we dive into any of that, how's everyone doing?
Fantastic. How about you guys?
I am doing great. This is my lovely co-host, Dr. Sarah Brooks, by the way. My name's Bridget.
Hello.
Is she an actual doctor?
Yes.
Oh.
Not like the medical kind, but PhD.
Yeah. That's why I always laugh. She insists on using the title, and I'm like,
Because it
put a little
lends me,
asterisk there. It's
it lends
PhD.
me some gravitas.
Yeah.
Instead of just being some random 20-something. I
There you
have
go.
at least that to back me up.
I'm going to get my doctorate in pottery and then tell everybody I'm a doctor.
I mean,
Sure. And that would be your right.
You can.
Technically. What's he a doctor of? Pottery.
By the way, I got my doctorate at Ohio State, so
Oh, no. So you know the area well. What year did you graduate?
2013.
So, yeah, the ugly tuna Saluna would have still been there.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah, we're
And
gonna
it was-
we're gonna talk about that.
It was still ugly then as
Yes. It was still ugly, and there was
Always.
a lot of tuna.
Oh god.
I know, I'm like looking at I've got our Twitch chat pulled up, and I just saw the
Yeah.
thing that Chris put in there about ignore the card. You don't see the card.
Yeah.
Thank
I was just
you.
noticing that too.
But anyway, yeah. How are you guys?
Fantastic. We just got back from CrimeCon Nashville, which was over the weekend, and it was another great Crime Con. And back in the saddle again.
Tired, and I feel like my throat feels like I drank gravel all weekend.
Yeah, I can kind of imagine that being a lot.
Yes, and the amount of like very open-ended questions you get, you go like somebody will come up to you and go, Brian Shaffer. So what happened?
Yeah,
And you're like, how much time do I have? Do I have
yeah, which is really
2 minutes or 3 hours?
you could definitely go into detail. We can keep it kind of compact because I'm
Focused.
sure you're sick of talking about it. But I'm kind of just going to open the floor to Brooks here because she has her little sort of vague personal connection to the case, which is what like inspired me to even reach out to you guys in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I've been listening to your guys' pod for like 8-10 years. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, probably 8 years.
It was the strangest thing. I was listening to Stitcher and it like auto played an episode. I think I was listening to like This American Life, and then it flipped to part 2 of the Cheshire Murders,
Oh,
which was very jarring.
And if you didn't know that it switched, you're like, wow, this story took a
Some
drastic
turn.
turn. Yeah.
Not just that, but part 2. So whenever part 2 had just come out, which I think was like 8-9 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So, and then I've been listening to y'all ever since then, which is, but yeah, I had gone back in time to like listen to the earlier episodes that I'd missed before that. And of course, Brian Shaffer was back in like 16, 17, I think the episodes were.
Yeah.
And it really, I got really into it because I did go to Ohio State and we used to go to Ugly Tuna. I wouldn't say frequently, but I had fellow grad students who would go there like every weekend to get the fish bowls. because you would get the plastic alligators in the fish bowls and they would just collect them in their offices.
Yeah, those.
Oh wait, like the grenadine shark beverage where it's like you flip the shark and it has like grenadine in it and it's like, oh, shark attack.
Yeah,
don't know if they
it was a
actually did-
very disgusting.
This
drink.
this was a fish bowl, and it had, like she said, it had things floating in it.
Yeah.
Some good, some bad, I'm sure. But and they would drop like 3 or 4 straws in it, and then you would sit around the table and consume it with your friend or
I
friend.
mean, that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It is kind of fun.
It was
And
way too sugary.
I don't know. This is speaking as somebody who's like who's 26. So
Oh yeah, it was primarily for the college students.
it was a popular thing to do. The lady seemed to like it, and it was a popular drink for quite some time there.
Yeah. Yeah, but we I don't know if it's still there, but the Mad Mex that was below Ugly Tuna.
Yeah, it's
We
not
went there every single Friday for margaritas for the 5 years I lived there. And of course the movie theater we used to go to a lot as well. And so knowing the location and how it is kind of an unusual place, the way that you have to take the escalator up and, I think hearing you guys talk about the case and being able to visualize this very sort of unique location, it started to like haunt me, I guess you might say.
Yeah,
And I think I've brought it up on our podcast like 3 or 4 times somehow.
probably, yeah, because we've talked about like, oh, like the jury question has come up before. The sort of we've tangentially touched on our like personal detective skills in various other conversations, but listening to this for me was really interesting because like I Google Maps some things to get like a vague idea, but I haven't been there. And I listened to all of your guys' episodes on it, sort of like do my homework, familiarize myself with it even more beyond just what Brooks has told me about it. And I was like, oh, this is like, yeah, this is nuts.
yeah. And when it wasn't, when they eventually closed down the Ugly Tuna, it was still there in some capacity, and so people would come to visit Columbus, and one of the things they would ask is, "Can you take me there?" And what's
Mhm.
kind of fascinating about taking somebody there is when you park in the parking garage, that would have been roughly where Brian's friends parked that night. Then you have to walk through a courtyard, then you go up that, the famous escalator, and then you'd see the opening for the bar. And on the outside, you could see where there was a balcony, but now it's all closed up. They've since moved the bar to a different location, and it's this office building. So where there once was an entrance point, there's just a wall. And so now when I take people to see it, it's not as eventful, and I think it's harder for people to get a sense of possibly what happened.
I do kind of understand like the switching locations thing, like the sort of press that would build up after a while, like everyone coming here be like, oh yeah, this is where this like creepy unsolved like tragic event happened, like the disappearance of like someone's friend, someone's son, etc. I could see why they would be like, we're gonna shift it over just a little bit.
I think it was actually a lease thing though.
Yeah, but also,
Oh yeah.
I mean, what's weird about college universities is when he went missing, and it became such a. I mean, at least in Columbus, Ohio, is something that people were talking about almost every weekend, because the bar is, no matter where you're at in the bar, you could see whoever was in the bar. There was no obstructions. There was really nowhere to hide. So this idea that somebody walked into a bar and they're seen on surveillance footage, and then they're not, we have no clue if they got out of the bar. And that was the narrative for so long, which I don't know if that's technically the correct narrative.
That was the thing that I found like just absolutely wild about this whole thing. It's like, we know he went into this place.
Yeah, and I think it'd be, to me, it'd be more of a mystery if, the surveillance footage was on the escalators. It wasn't on the entrance points. If it was on the entrance point, then to me it's more of a, ooh, spooky, did he just disappear into thin air? But what's crazy about colleges is when there is a missing person or there is a murder on those college campuses, they're very quick to do what I call a Google scrubbing, where they're
Yeah, damage
basically,
control.
the first couple days he goes missing, and you search Google, Ohio State student goes missing, it's coming up in Google searches within a week. It's almost hard to find any information about it because they've done such a good job to bury it. Because if you're sending your kid to school and you're looking up universities, you don't want the first thing that pops up when you
Mhm.
Google Ohio State, to have a missing student.
Yeah. So aside from Brooks's kind of vague personal connection to this case, the other sub point that I have for just like discuss the Brian Schaefer case, which if anyone wants further details, go listen to the True Crime Garage episodes about it. They cover every single base. You will get a fantastic overview of the case. But that being said, what would we say are our quote unquote favorite theories regarding what might have happened?
Well, it gets tricky because you've seen the building, right? And so it's often said that there's one way in, one way out. Guy walks into a bar, disappears. All right, like that's kind of the ongoing story here. And anybody that's seen that building knows that that's not real true, right? Like there's multiple ways in and out of that building, while there is only really one usable way in and out of the bar. That's true. I guess somebody could hop from one of the balconies, maybe kind of free fall down to the concrete landing below. But yeah, the bar itself kind of one way in, one way out situation. But the building, like like the captain already pointed out, that camera was not fixed on the entrance to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a bar per se. It's on the escalator that's leading up to a landing that from there you can then walk into that bar. And so while the story, it makes for a better story when you say a guy walks into a bar and he's never seen again, the reality of it is that there's a lot of ways in and out of that building. Now, that doesn't mean he made it out of that building. That also means that there's lots of other ways that somebody could have got him out of there had he already been harmed. But my theory stands from what we talked about when we covered it back in 2000. I do believe you're right. I think it was 2016 that I had said then that I think that he somehow managed to make it out of that bar. Now, I've not come up with a great theory as to how that happened, but that area, campus at that time, and look, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to say anything bad about the university. It's just the way that it was. Back then, it was pretty common for dudes to load up into a car that don't attend school, that don't live on campus, and to drive into campus with the idea of we are going to probably victimize somebody tonight. What does that mean? That might mean robbing somebody. That might be stealing something from cars or from an apartment where there's, and so it wouldn't be crazy for a car full of dudes to pull up and see somebody like Brian Schaefer walking kind of this preppy, he's obviously drunk or walking, behaving like somebody who's quite intoxicated on the surveillance footage, even though it's just briefly that we see him there. But for me, if I'm in that car, if I'm driving that car, one of the guys in that car, I'm pointing him out and I'm saying to the people I'm with, there's an easy target. And while I never met Brian, I'm not going to pretend to know his personality. There's something about the pictures and there's something about the people that I've spoke to that did know him that suggests to me that he might not have just been so willing to hand over a wallet or hand over a credit card or debit card, that he might, especially, look, I wish I was still in my 20s. I'm not, but I tell you this, and I think that a lot of other guys might back this up. Some guys, you get enough alcohol in them, and ladies too, get enough alcohol in them, especially when you're young. You almost feel bulletproof, right? And you might be a little quick to mouth off back. And so, unfortunately, I think something happened out on the street for whatever reason, he's not captured on the camera going out. I think when they had to get rid of him, they chose to get rid of him. They tossed him in a dumpster. And I know that they did search the landfill, and I'm sure that they did their best. That's not an easy task.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say this because I wish that the people that believe he's on a beach somewhere, I would rather that they be right. But I unfortunately think he's probably in that landfill. There wasn't a huge search effort for him until after a couple days had expired, and they very easily could have got rid of one or some of those dumpsters in that time period.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this such a compelling story is that on the surface, it's like, oh, guy's videotaped walking into a bar and then he's never seen again. But then as soon as you look closer at it, there's all these tiny little places where technically somebody could have slipped through the cracks, like the camera being pointed at the escalator, not directly at like the doors to the bar and things like that. And like knowing that like there were places in the area where you could technically maybe have slipped out of like a service entrance or whatever, like, or gotten lost in the crowd and then
not even
down
just
like back roads.
Well, not even just a service entrance, but what people can't see on their surveillance footage is if you turn left when you leave the bar, you go down the escalators. But if you turn right, there's actually 3 exit doors, 2 of them that take you to the same location.
Mm-hmm.
There essentially was a wall there at one point, so that there's the 2 exit doors that lead you to the same place. One was a service door at one point, and then now it's just open to the public. And I've been in there several times and just walked through those exit doors. You're technically not supposed to be back there, but nobody really stops you. And then also when you talk to security guards that have been there for a long time now, I don't think there's any security guard that's still there from the time that it opened, but they've heard stories, and a lot of the cameras weren't up and functioning yet. And then also all the cameras were there was motion detectors, but there was a scuffle that was, or what they thought was going to lead to a scuffle outside of the Ugly Tuna in the courtyard, where so all night the security guards were, if a door opened and the camera started going to the door, they're overriding that all night to make sure that this what looked like could be a scuffle didn't take place. So, and there's a lot of crazy rumors out there that for some reason the band didn't like him, and the band beat him up and chopped him up into pieces and put him in their, and when
that's the first I'm hearing of that.
Well, but when you start hearing theories like that, I mean,
yeah,
it just shows you how far-fetched things get. And I think what I learned the most about the Brian Schaefer case is who is controlling the narrative, because when they started questioning people, his mother passed away before he went missing. So they're questioning the father. Well, the father wasn't really that involved in his son's life at that time period, but he was controlling the narrative. He's the one saying, well, this doesn't make any sense. And my son was going to go on this vacation with his girlfriend and get married, and there was no evidence to back that up. And I think the father kind of try to lead whatever story he wanted to put out to the public. And I'd always say, like, look, if you went missing, your father might present a whole different story than the story that your mother presents. And he was basically verbally abusive towards a lot of people speaking out about what happened that night. And I think because of that, it got a lot of people to shut up, because they didn't want to, can you imagine you're searching for your friend and the father is talking trash about you to everybody there and to the media?
Yeah.
At some point you're going, I can't continue to go on these searches.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
For example, he didn't like people bringing up the fact that Brian Schaefer was intoxicated. Look, if you're drunk, that doesn't make you a bad guy.
Yeah.
Alcohol's illegal, and he was in a place that's legally serving alcohol to people that are of age and paying taxes on those purchases as well. So
and with a
Because-
bunch of his friends, or I mean, like at least with a group of his friends who were doing the
Right.
exact same thing.
And I mean, come on, Brian Schaefer's not the first college kid to get drunk on campus, right? So
Far
it's
from
not
it.
it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not something that needs to be that we need to put some spin on. And in fact, and not to speak ill of his father, because his father's no longer around either and had a tragic death as well. But the sometimes cleaning up the story like that, you're not doing the missing person any favors.
Yeah.
We're not, I don't think we're going to get to the truth any faster by burying the truth. So that is, I don't know that there's a lot of examples of that, but I do know of that one particular example.
hmm
And the Reds just won 12-7. I know you were concerned.
I'm so excited.
I had
No,
$24 on the game, so
I mean,
Well, there you go.
I'm happy.
we've done almost 800 episodes of our main show and another couple hundred of our bonus content. And what I argue is that we have this genre that we're in called true crime, and I really think the genre should be called What We Think We Know So Far, because almost all these cases on the surface, once you start diving in deep, you really start uncovering a whole different story. And I think that's why a lot of people are compelled, the deeper they dive into stories, to do a long form, audio documentary or even a TV documentary, is to present the true story, or as much of a true story as they can try to present. Because in some of these cases, the first narrative becomes the narrative, and that's the narrative we stay with, no matter what.
Yeah, as far as like, I don't necessarily know if I have like a personal kind of pet theory. I guess I would say like, I would assume based on what I do know about the case, Nick, your theory kind of does make the most sense to me. He, somehow managed to slip out unnoticed, whether that was just like getting lost in a crowd going down the escalator or whatever, and was met with some sort of foul play on the way back to his apartment and was unfortunately disposed of. But there's also this one kind of very out there sort of bit of science, I suppose. I saw a TikTok, and I will try and link it, but it was this person explaining how their physics teacher had told them that technically anytime you touch something, there's like a 1 in 400 million whatever chance that the atoms will align perfectly and you'll just like go through it.
Okay, look.
That's all I got.
I'm going to start being more careful.
Yeah. I'm going to touch
as soon as I heard that, I was,
nothing.
and not necessarily this case in particular, but as soon as I heard that, I was like, I wonder if like, maybe it's only happened once or twice in the entirety of recorded human history, but I wonder if someone has ever like set down an object like that they were certain that they just put their pen right here on the desk and it just clicked through reality. Has that ever happened to a person?
Well, and look, I mean, there's people
and
that
I'm no scientist, so I could be explaining this completely wrong and thinking about it in like the most simplistic terms possible. But that is where my mind went when I heard that little tidbit.
There's been a lot of missing people in the north west part of the country. I think a lot of that is because of the terrain, people going camping and hiking and all those things. But I don't think you can be dismissive of, also, is somebody going to be attacked by wildlife? Is there a possibility that there's gaps in the universe or gaps in the dimension that we just don't understand? I don't think that's impossible. I think, but in this case, I think it's more likely that he wasn't abducted by aliens or attacked by Bigfoot.
That probably is like the least likely.
Yeah,
but it was something where I was just like, I wonder.
I guess we'll never know. I mean, there's people on TikTok and YouTube that claim that they time traveled And so unless he
That's a
comes,
bit. Yeah, those are a little much.
well, they claimed that they just stepped into another dimension and they were lost for a while, and then somehow made it their way back through. I mean, I think, look, I think that stuff is fun to talk about and to theorize, but I don't think it's likely in most of these cases.
Yeah, I would say that's a fair enough assessment.
Well, and the thing, it's if we can think that it seems most likely that he somehow made it out of that building. Let's forget about the bar, because all that really matters, did he make it out of the building or not? And if he made it out of that building with some assistance or with none at all, it's also, just, I guess, as probable that maybe he walked willingly with somebody somewhere and then something happened to him later. We did talk to a few detectives that we know that the Scioto River was searched as best as persons can search a river. We know that his family was there, and there were civilian search of that area as well. But we've talked to some detectives that feel like they don't stutter or hesitate to say they don't feel like that's where he ended up, because they are quite confident that he would have resurfaced at some point. And unfortunately, we had a case a handful years later, Joey LaBute, that we believe somebody put him into the river. And then, of course, he did resurface. He was eventually located and found. And Joey was, we know somebody very, very close to us that we've known for many, many years, who said that Joey was a great guy. It was somebody that he had worked with. And so just makes these things all the more sad and tragic.
Yeah, Brooks, what were you going to say?
Just that the one thing I always thought, like listening to your original episodes on it, was that there had to be some sort of emergency exit, because I'm pretty sure you can't have a bar without at least 2 points of egress. So, and I don't think
it's different. I think it's different because it was part of a building. So you technically could claim that you have the balcony, and I don't know if there was a way to exit the balcony safely, but once you got out of the main entrance point of the bar, there's three exit points to the right, and then you had the escalators. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the building codes are, but if you went in that bar, it's kind of a unique bar in that aspect, because even if you're on the balcony, you probably could see the person out on the balcony. Like there wasn't even pillars in that bar to hide behind. So if you're on the far corner and somebody else was on the other far corner, you could wave to them,
And I guess he could have been concealed somewhere and then moved at another time. That is an interesting question that I did get at CrimeCon, where somebody was asking, well, how early on the tapes do they start watching the surveillance to see people coming and going, and how late you'd have to ask law enforcement that. We clearly weren't there with them. But one thing that I thought was where I really get wrapped up in true crime is the investigation and the strategies that are used, or maybe in some cases failed to use in some investigations. How do we figure out A, what happened, and B, who's responsible, and C, how do we apprehend that person, right? Because like the Rachel Marin case, we have a lot of evidence, physical evidence, scientific evidence of who the perpetrator was. He's even been linked to another crime. He's just not been identified or apprehended. So that's still a big part of the investigation, obviously. But one thing that I found intriguing about the Brian Schaefer investigation was I can't remember if he was referred to as the orange sweater man or the orange sweatshirt man, but there was a person that was spotted, so Brian's seen going into, there's no doubting that he's seen going up the escalator and into the bar. Okay. We have him on camera going up the escalator to get to the bar. What we don't have is him going down the escalator to leave the bar for good. And what police found was they said, well, here's an orange sweater or orange sweatshirt guy that we have leaving the bar via escalator, but we never have him arriving. So they were working the theory briefly. And when I say briefly, I think it was only a matter of a few days or a couple of weeks that maybe Brian comes in, somehow concealed this orange sweater, changes into it, and leaves. Now, that doesn't mean that he's planning on going and living in Costa Rica for the rest of his life, or that he's, planning to disappear. Just simply, we've all gone places, and maybe you change a shirt, maybe you bring a jacket, something of that nature, put on a hat. They're just saying we have orange sweater guy leaving. We never have him arriving. So that would imply to me that they went way back and looking quite early on those tapes for that person, that individual, to arrive at the bar to conclude that it wasn't Brian Schaefer. What we do end up finding out, though, the way that they concluded that it wasn't Brian Schaefer is they found the guy and he said, yes, it was just that simple. I went into the bar. It got late. It got cold. I put on a garment that I brought with me that you happened to not catch on camera on the way in. And then I exited the bar wearing the orange sweatshirt. And oh, by the way, Mr. Police Officer, here it is to confirm that I own that item.
Well, and to stay on that theory for a second, there is a picture that I found when I was doing a deep dive. I was actually working with another podcast network to do a long form series on Brian Schaefer. And so when we were looking through the footage, we believe that we found a photo that if police had not identified that guy, he had the same type of shoes, same type of jeans, and could that possibly be Brian? And so where it gets complicated is that Brian was actually at the Ugly Tuna earlier in the day. Mm-hmm. They went to several other bars, and then for whatever reason, they went back to that bar. And one of the things I've always, questioned is, did he go back to that bar because he left something? Did he leave a jacket and go, hey, I know we went to that bar earlier? And it wasn't like the coolest bar. It wasn't like the bar that like everybody wanted to go to. So is it, and I don't know if it was just, hey, it's on our way back to your apartment, so let's stop at this bar first. But I always theorize that maybe he went back to the bar because he left a jacket. I've never seen the surveillance footage of the first time of him entering that bar earlier that day. I'd be interested to see that footage to see if he did have a jacket, and then do we have him leaving the bar earlier that day, and what was he wearing? Because if he left a jacket behind, again, if he put on that jacket, it'd be harder for law enforcement to figure out, who went up and down that escalator. But I think, and maybe Nick would disagree with me on this, but a lot of these missing person cases, the investigations are they're messed up from the beginning, because in this country, you have the right to go missing if you want to go missing. And so how serious does law enforcement take a missing person report? When does that report take place? Because some of these, it's the family trying to figure out where the guy went for a couple of days before they contact law enforcement. And by that time, they lost precious time, and also probably lost, an accurate account of who was in the bar and who wasn't in the bar, and who do they need to question, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Nick, you bringing up kind of the fact that you zero in on the investigation, that actually does sort of lead into the next point I have for us, which, how would we kind of rate our personal crime solving or detective abilities? Do we think we could actually close a case? Anyone who would like to go first can, or I can go first.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you get me a questionable death investigation where the guy managed to write out an extensive note, have it notarized, and make sure that the weapon that he used to take his own life was his dominant hand, I would put my ability at 100%.
Yeah, there you go. I really don't know where I would kind of rate myself, I guess, because but sometimes we're big fans of the last podcast on the left,
Yeah.
And sometimes listening to some of those episodes, like the ones about Robert Picton, for example, where there's this, person who's preying on what they call like the less dead. So like sex workers, undocumented immigrants, things like that, like people that cops really kind of don't, in some cases, care to look for to begin with, where so many people were saying, hey, there's a lot of sex workers going missing in this area, and we keep seeing this one guy pop up. You guys should really look into that. And the police force kind of just responded with that, they probably just left. So I see cases like that, and I'm like, well, anybody with two brain cells to rub together could probably have figured that one out. But then I'll see other cases where, like, and I can't even necessarily think of a specific example, but they'll figure out like, oh, well, this person was hiding out here because we went through the trash and this connects back to that. And that means they bought it from this specific, they bought whatever from this specific, like that. I don't think I could ever get there on my own.
Well, I think
So it really depends on the complexity of the case.
Well, yeah, but I also think this notion that we have as a society that, somebody is found dead and that law enforcement just doesn't care is one of the biggest bullshit things that our society has come up with. When we've talked to these detectives, well, no matter what stage of life an individual is at, it's their job. That's their job to take that case and close that case. And
I do believe Robert Picton was in Canada. Yes, Brooks?
Yep.
Yeah, but here's where it gets more complicated, because it's like if you call law enforcement and say, hey, I haven't seen my neighbor in a couple days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're like, he's an adult. He's not been reported missing. And so until there's something, they have all these cases that are open that they have to focus on. So I think this idea that police officers just don't care, or like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Mara Murray case, but they come across this abandoned vehicle, and a lot of people say in that case, well, police just didn't take it serious. Well, how many abandoned vehicles do police come across every day? And so they get into this routine of, well, somebody's probably going to come pick up this vehicle within 24 hours. But once somebody doesn't, and then again, once people start making missing person reports, then law enforcement starts taking it serious. But I think sometimes, again, they're behind the eight ball. But you can't investigate a crime until you actually know that the crime happened.
Yeah, and that case is the captain's spot on there, because an abandoned vehicle or a vehicle found on the roadside is very routine for patrol officers, and you will come across anywhere from maybe a dozen to 50 to 60 of them over the course of 1 year's time, and those never lead to any bigger crime. Like if a crime did occur in Mara Murray's case, then that would be a very rare roadside vehicle situation. But I will say this, I'm not going to pretend like that the same level of effort or even brains is put into every investigation. I was lucky enough to, about less than a year ago, I did a 3-day CSI training course in Indiana, and we were reviewing a serial killer case out of the Chicago area from the 1990s, and this portion, each one of the lessons or classes, what have you, was taught by a different instructor, and this particular instructor, because it was a serial case, was retired FBI. And so we're going through, now we've looked at, he's discussed 3 different murders, when they happened, how they were killed, and we see pictures of the victim, how they were found. And after the 3rd victim, I know that we still got like 4 more victims to get through, but after the 3rd victim, I raised my hand, and he said, yes, you there? And I said, where's the crime scene photos? He goes, you're looking at them. They took one single photo at all three of those different crime scenes, and it was only of the murder victim. They didn't photograph anything next to them. They didn't bother to take different angles of the victim. And I said, why and how could this be? I said, there's nothing for us to go back and retroactively work this case, because we don't have the proper visuals to form any ideas or theories as to what happened or who perpetrated this, because you have a single photo. This is the 90s, right? Like it's not, we're not talking about 100 years ago. And this is a big city, Chicago. And he said to me, he goes, I said the same thing when they brought me on. Where's the crime scene photos? I needed to see the crime scene photos. And for 3 murders, they handed me 3 total photos. And he said, sometimes it's as simple as I brought this to another detective who started working as a detective about a dozen or so years before this serial case took place. And he said that when he first came on, the flash bulbs for the cameras were like $10 a bulb. So when they would send him to, when they would send him to a crime scene, they would be like, hey, don't take, try to take it easy on the amount of photos that you take. We have a budget that we have to stay under. And I mean, that's the truth too. I mean, these departments do have a budget to
that is so wild to think about.
That they are tethered to. And so in his experience, while we're not talking about murders in that situation, but the chief was very concerned about the flash bulb of their camera. And in the Chicago case, I said to the FBI agent, I said, were these detectives just dumb, or is this as simple as these are poor black people and they just may not have worked the case very difficult? And he said, Nick, I think the answer is somewhere in between.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and what I mean by like this notion that our society is like the police just don't give a shit. You got to remember that a lot of these detectives, they're just a part of the equation. They have to deal with upper management telling them what their budget is and what. Look, there's hundreds of cases out there that they have DNA, but the departments just don't have enough money to fund the DNA test. But also, there's plenty of detectives I've talked to that they're like, we believe we solved the case. We gave the information to the prosecution, but the prosecutors don't think that they can get a conviction.
Right.
And so then the case just goes cold. So I think it's, that's all a part of this equation. And what's really sad is that we live in a society that these cases go unsolved simply because of money. And you go, and Nick's been working on that for several years with a project called Project Porchlight, where they look into cases and then try to raise the money to get the DNA tests so we can get some results. But the other sad thing that Nick knows, that some of these police departments, they don't want to work with outside sources to raise the money for whatever reason.
Yeah, we have found, so porchlightonline.org, if anybody's interested in learning what we do or contributing to the cause. And right now, I believe that we are close
Chris,
to having.
Can we get that dropped in the chat? For
close to having enough
interested.
Money for to take on another case. And we've been reserved to, and this is still very important work, but identifying Jane and John Doe's, because like the captain said, there's not every agency out there, even if they just need the funding, are they willing to work with outsiders. And unfortunately, I won't say the agency, but we only do Ohio cases, so you can kind of sort that out. But there's one particular case where they have said publicly, this is the guy who did it. He's already been executed by the state of Ohio for committing similar crimes in a similar time period. We are convinced that this guy did it. The case is closed. And I've had multiple phone calls with this agency. They have confirmed, or at least told me, I don't know that it's 100% confirmation, but the persons on the phone with me have said that they have the perpetrator, the killer's DNA, but they are unwilling to test it because you cannot execute a guy twice. And we know that he did it. And I said, but do you really know? Yeah, we know.
Mhm.
Well, how do you know? Their answers are less than satisfactory. And the thing is, they won't let us pay to test the DNA because there's no win for them, right?
Mhm.
If it comes back and it's him, great. They said that a long time ago. But guess what? It costs them nothing. It costs them no time. It costs them no effort. It costs them no money, no resources. But if it comes back and it's not him, now how bad do they look?
That gets very, very messy.
Considering that case took place almost 40 years ago, and now they let a killer go free in their small town, still walking around, and who knows what the individual went on to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but back to your question, I don't know if I could solve a case, but if you had to do one aspect of the investigation, I think I'd do okay with the interviews. I think I could ask enough questions. I think sometimes these detectives, because of, I think sometimes they're so quick to ask a handful of questions, they go with a gut feeling and just move on.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think I just keep the person talking as long as I could, and and maybe see what happens.
Yeah, I did take a forensics class when I was in like high school, so like I'd like to imagine that maybe I could make one or two little connections, but I don't know about anything particularly complex. I would probably be very out of my depth, but at least I have a vague idea of like how blood splatter analysis works. Yeah. So I've got that going for myself. Brooks, what about you? How would you kind of rate your detective skills?
I feel like I could be decent at it because I am very detail oriented, and I've been obsessed with true crime for 20 something years at this point. And I've talked about this on the pod before. I'm obsessed with watching police interview videos.
Right.
There's a YouTube channel called Explore With Us where they're just like, they'll have multi-hour interviews with suspects of crimes. And I get obsessed watching and trying to read body language and stuff like that. So I feel like I could do okay.
So maybe put together, we'd all have a shot. And figure
and you hope
out.
that that's how they're working cases too, right? Like that when you have a department that has the resources and has the people power, you hope that they're working them as a collective, because two heads are always better than one. And there's also an emotional strain too for the really good cops out there and the really good detectives out there. 4 shoulders are better than 2, and sometimes you put this case, a homicide case, all on one person, and it can be a lot for those detectives to deal with emotionally and mentally. They have families too, and there's things that they see, and there's unfortunately they have the constant interaction. Hopefully, I say hopefully because there are some families that are kept at an arm's distance, but it's difficult to talk with the family and to relive that with them time and time again. They just lost somebody very precious to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That Ohio case you were referencing, by the way, I just want to mention, I know it's not the one you were talking about, but I was really glad you guys covered the Boardman murders of those 3 young boys. I grew up 45 minutes from there, and that was where we, that was like the closest decent mall and movie theater to my tiny town.
Right.
And it's a wild one because they finally tested DNA. What was that? Just a couple years ago?
About a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a little more than that. And they ended up closing out 2 cases. Joseph Norman Hill Sr. was responsible for the murders of Brad Bellino and David Evans. And there's another murder that took place 2 years before Bellino, Thomas Baird. There's some varying stories on him, but the more that I dig on that one. It sounds like the details have been murky from the beginning.
Yeah.
So to rule out Joseph Norman Hill as a possibility in that case, which they've not done that. They've not ruled him out.
Yeah.
For all we know, they're going back and working the Baird case the best that they can, given the time that's, Boardman PD really deserves a big kudos for that case, because they never stopped working Brad Bellino's case. The medical examiner claimed that David Evans' murder was due to natural causes, that he died from slipping into a diabetic coma, which he did have severe diabetes, and that could have contributed to his death. But the police chief at the time said, look, you don't slip into a diabetic coma and then drag yourself across this yard, conceal your body behind these bushes, and meanwhile break your wrists in the commission of doing that. That just doesn't ring true. It doesn't make sense. That's a homicide. So they kept that against the medical examiner's best wishes. They kept that listed as a homicide as far as they were concerned. And so that's a powerful thing for their investigation. They closed out 2 of them. The thing is, though, one thing that I hope that we really start examining and talking about and getting very loud and vocal about it is with the Colonial Parkway murders. They closed out two of the, that case could have 8 victims. It could have more. But they closed out 2 of the victims. They closed out another cold case homicide. So that's 3 murders now. Now that individual, and his name escapes me at the moment, but they have his DNA. Yeah. Elmer something, but we won't.
Elmer Fudd.
We won't spin our tires on that. But they have his DNA, just
Pesky
like
rabbit.
Just like the Boardman case, they have Joseph Hill's DNA. Guess what Joseph Hill did after he murdered David Evans? He moved to San Bernardino County in California in 1978. Do you mean to tell me that I'm supposed to believe that he killed those 2 kids and raped and murdered them very violently, and that he never did that ever again? Sorry, I won't swallow that pill at all. I don't believe it. And so the thing that we need to get vocal, we need to get loud about, when you have the FBI and you have law enforcement that stand up there and they tell us and they're not in control of this, but we need to take control of this. The people, the citizens, they tell us we cannot legally go back and test. We can't enter this person's. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. was the guy that's responsible for 3 murders in the Colonial Parkway case. We cannot legally enter his DNA into CODIS to try to link him to other unsolved murders because of the way that the laws have been written. And we cannot, even though we've been told by the Ohio AG, we've been told by Boardman PD, again, who's done a very good job, who's been in communication with San Bernardino County, California, since the discovery of Joseph Norman Hill being the perpetrator of 1, and then 6 months later, we're told 2 child homicides. Everybody on the ground, boots on the ground, are doing a pretty good job on all those cases, Boardman PD especially. But the way that the laws are written, we can't go now and take Joseph Norman Hill's DNA and put it into CODIS because of the way the laws are written. That needs to be changed. You have to wonder, with DNA being the golden age of solving these cases, and I think actually cell phones will take that over at some point, hopefully. But this whole idea that, we need to protect Alan Wade Wilmer Sr.'s rights. The son of a bitch died of natural causes. He didn't spend a day in prison for committing how many murders? Joseph Norman Hill lived to be 80 years old and died in a very nice retirement home.
Yeah.
We need to protect his rights? No.
Well, that's the thing is, once you commit a heinous crime like he did, you basically become property of the state. And so what we do with you now, if we find out that you killed somebody and we never arrested you and we never convicted you, but once we know that you did that, you should become property of the state. I mean, that's the way I view it. I mean, it's really sad because I think one of the big things as far as the true crime world goes is when they have when they end up solving one or two cases and they end up lumping a bunch of other victims with that person and they don't finish the investigation, you got 29, roughly 29 murdered children in Atlanta that they claim Wayne Williams killed all those victims, and it's just not true. And those poor families have sat there without answers for all these years.
And
you can
these
see
sort
why
of,
we
like-
have a podcast, right?
Oh, absolutely,
We
100%.
don't shut up.
Well, I mean, we do the same thing.
Yeah.
This is essentially this is mandatory fun for us, scheduled every week, because we're both chronic overschedulers, and if we didn't do this, we would just never see each other again. So now we have group therapy where no one heals every single week. But these sort of incredibly heavy cases, we're going to set those to the side now, because
Okay.
the next point I have is, what sort of trial do we think would be the most interesting to sit on the jury for?
Well, I mean, a murder case, obviously. I think if you had to sit on the jury for something else, I think it'd be tough to be on, like, vehicular manslaughter case. I think that'd be very difficult to be on, where I don't condone drinking and driving. It'd be really hard for me to put somebody in prison for a very long time. Depending on, I mean, obviously on how heinous it was, but I think that would be a very difficult case. But I think probably the more intriguing case would be a homicide.
I would like to sit on the jury for like an art heist or something. I think that would be entertaining, especially if it's like from some billionaire's private collection or whatever, and nobody actually got hurt. Just want to hear how they did it.
Well, and I mean, truth be told, I would really prefer not to sit on any jury ever, because I do think it's probably a more difficult job than it appears. And
I'm sure.
And it comes with a level of responsibility that I hope that everybody takes to, as serious as humanly possible. But if I were forced to, I've been obsessed with unsolved serial murders for an uncomfortably long time. So that, those are the investigations that intrigue me the most. And look, what the hell? Let's get really selfish, right? We'll go, give me a serial murder case, and I want it, no cameras allowed in the courtroom. So my eyeballs and earballs are hearing and seeing things that many Americans will not get to hear.
It's pretty intense.
And now he's frozen.
Oh,
There
no,
he is.
we're good.
And I was reading something.
No, your camera froze.
You sure? I
Dream-
just didn't hold it.
Dreams do come true.
I was like that.
See, he's frozen again.
Uh-oh. Anyway.
Okay, next.
Yeah, I feel like I think there's a division between most interesting and most fun, because I think those are kind
Right.
of separate. Yeah, because I would be with you guys on murder or potentially serial murder being like really interesting to try to like pick apart the clues and all that. But I think fun-wise, anything that involves a really wealthy person getting ripped off,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I might
think
enjoy.
I think the Trump trial would have been interesting to be involved in,
That
because
would have been wild.
but I think it goes back to, like, you can have you go back to like OJ, and the jury is saying, well, maybe he did it. I mean, I think that would be the hardest, is where you go,
Yeah.
maybe he did it. It seems like he did it, but did they prove that, without a shadow of a doubt, So I think that would be difficult. I mean, I think they proved it, but I think in that case, DNA was so new that the way that they had to present the DNA information was just kind of lost on the jury. And I think now that we understand how, and prosecutors understand how to present the DNA correctly to the jury. That's why you're going to get a lot more convictions because of DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so final point is only kind of tangentially true crime related because it involves the Kennedys. What do we think of the theory that the Kennedy line is cursed because of what JPK Sr. did to Rosemary? And for anybody who doesn't know, Rosemary Kennedy was like the oldest Kennedy daughter, and she was lobotomized at age like 23 or something, and then just sort of hidden away because he didn't want her, sometimes vaguely difficult behavior to damage the potential political careers of his sons. Oliver, can you get off that box, please?
Yeah, thankfully that's a word
Sorry,
that we don't get to hear discussed too much.
Antagonizing me.
I like to think that that the father just got some really bad information from a couple of doctors that were pushing an envelope.
Oh, I'm
there.
absolutely certain.
Well, I tend to agree with that, but then when you don't tell your wife prior to a major elective surgery on your eldest child, that makes it seem a little strange.
And then
right?
and then just sort of not keep that information as quiet as possible within your own family, because I remember listening to, again, the last podcast series when they were doing a Relaxed Fit episode about some just historical cases that involved the lobotomy and they kept Rosemary sequestered and away from everybody, to the point that JFK at one point was when he finally found out what happened to her, he was like, hold on a second, where's Rosemary been this entire time?
Yeah.
I mean, that gets difficult too because of the lobotomy. Then in the state that it left her in, and she required a certain level of medical care and daily care and attention that one would expect to have to receive facility rather than, so I guess you could argue that. I guess, look, I'm not trying to besmirch the Kennedy name. I grew up a big fan of John Kennedy and of Robert Kennedy, but it's not like they're not without fault on some things, right? Bay of Pigs invasion turned out not to be a great idea, but the thing is, unfortunately, I think that the father, Kennedy Sr., and probably some others, maybe have done enough that curse could have come from anybody or anywhere. Really, it might.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think if you're gonna get cursed.
And another real tragedy too, that as I understand it, is she wasn't heavily sedated for the procedure because it was something that this lobotomy sounded more like exploratory surgery to me.
Her story makes me
like Weird Al Yankovic cutting for the very first time is kind of the way
sad.
that I understand it to be. Yeah, all horrible stuff.
They were such a wealthy family. Yes, maybe she did have some kind of difficult behavior as a person who did have developmental delays, but they absolutely 100% could have afforded just a chaperone.
Well,
because she did have a public social life. She was a debutante at one point.
And Kennedy
you didn't have to do this.
They had a lot of money because Kennedy Sr. stepped on a lot of necks along the way to success.
Well, and it wasn't just stepping on necks, but when you need an in, and there's multiple groups that you can pick from to try to help you get to the place you're going. When you pick bad groups that will eventually want the favor returned, I think they got in bed with a lot of bad individuals. And I think and then also, I mean, if you listen to the one Kennedy speech where he talks, about wars being bad and the whole basically war complex that we have built, you're talking about millions and billions of dollars that he could be affecting other people's generational wealth. So you start getting a target on your back very quickly, and I think it's more likely that they're it was I don't know if karma is the right word, but I think it was getting in bed with the wrong people and them coming back to collect more so than possibly a curse.
Yeah, definitely the more likely option, but I feel if you're gonna earn a curse, I think you might have gotten enough bad karma to maybe do that.
Yeah, and not just one member of the family.
Oh yeah,
No.
There's a reason that there's so many biographies have been written about like just about every single member of that family. At this point, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and now and how many years later? Almost 60-some years later, we still have
Chris bootlegging helped pay the bills too.
Yeah,
That it probably did.
well, and 60-some years later, we now have a Kennedy that's running for president. So
Actually, it's the worm that's piloting him. Running for president.
The little tiny worm inside his brain.
Brainworm.
Yeah, it's pirating him like one of the Evangelion mechs. It's
Look.
running for president that way.
Look, if you told me all three people that are running, or I think there's technically 5, but if you told me all 5 people had little aliens inside their brains controlling them, like Dr. Doolittle or whatever that movie was,
I'd buy it.
I'd go, sure.
Why not? Adult life is already so goddamn weird, to quote John Mulaney.
Yeah. Sucks. It sucks.
So, having discussed that, unless anyone has anything else to say about that or about, frankly, anything, that's going to bring us to our concluding segment, which is something that we like to call the weekly worsening, which is at the end of every podcast episode, we share how we are more authentically ourselves, living more of our own truth in a way that makes us so much more insufferable to be around. Brooks, do you have an example? If not, I can go first. You guys can kind of see what we're talking about precisely.
Yeah, mine falls along the same themes. I tend to go through these theme periods, but playing so many video games, and I started playing Stray over the weekend, and
oh boy,
I just want to talk about it all the time, but I'm not doing that to people. I'm not. Until we're done with the pod, and then I'm probably going to talk your ear off about it. But,
and I'm happy to hear it, bestie.
There's that part, and then the 3D printing continues to be just.
I know.
insane.
I see all your little guys on your desk.
I keep sending you snaps of random things, but I lost my mind today because I printed the tiniest shovel, and I didn't mean to print it that small.
Right.
And I was just losing it. I couldn't breathe.
Well, so you could always carry it around with you, and so if somebody was digging a hole in the conversation, you could just pull it out.
There you go. Give it to them. Dig yourself out.
Yeah. But how is this making you a better person?
Oh no, it's making her worse.
Worsening.
Okay, so so it's what I'm doing to be a worse individual.
It's basically something that I'm doing that I really enjoy, but
that
then
makes me more annoying.
Yeah, because then I won't quit. Like I've been Snapchatting her like several times a day with various.
And by the way, I'm not annoyed by this. It's delightful.
But I did want to show you something I printed because I thought you would get very excited, and I wanted to see your reaction. So I printed this goose.
He's got
These
the keys.
are the world's tiniest 3D printed skeleton keys.
It's a wonderful morning in the village, and you're a horrible goose.
Is it a metaphor for something?
No, it's Untitled Goose Game.
Oh, okay.
Which is quite, again, it's a beautiful morning in the village, and you are a horrible goose. It's a puzzle game where you play as a goose that antagonizes people in an idyllic English countryside village.
Yeah, and in the very beginning, you have to steal a gardener's keys. So I printed tiny, impossibly small skeleton keys and put them on a key ring, and it has a magnetic mouth. So
I think this just makes you a delightful person.
I was losing. I didn't know if those would print correctly because they're so delicate, and I was like, oh, nailed it. Between that and my tiny shovel, man, I'm just.
I absolutely love to hear it, love to see it. Hell yes. The way that I am worse this week will come as the opposite of a surprise to anyone who has been following the podcast for more than 2 weeks at this point. Girl, help. I'm hyper fixating. The only thing I want to do is play Fallout. It consumes my every waking thought. I physically cannot stop. It is the only thing I did for the entirety of today before the podcast. I woke up, I turned on my PC, and then I did not move for like 5 hours. Help me.
Oh yeah, I saw the Steam pop up on my computer.
And
It said-
that's another thing. Steam keeps fucking snitching. So now we always clock each other when we're meant to be doing other things, but we're both playing video games. So that's how I'm worse this week.
I'm very
The
interested.
Fallout brain rot has not left me, and at this point, I'm wondering if it's going to.
I'm
And
very-
also, we're like 3 weeks out from the Ghost movie. I'm
Mm.
going to lose my mind. So
Like-
that's
like a
also another way that I'm
like
worse.
a remake of Ghost.
No. The concert, both narrative and concert film for the band Ghost, which
Okay.
is my favorite thing in the whole entire world. So
We're-
as that approaches, the insanity mounts. How are you guys worse this week?
You can see it on my screen. I keep bringing things into this room and setting them down and then never doing anything with them. So eventually they'll find me buried alive in here about 3 weeks after I expired.
Brooks, I can see that happening to you too.
Mm,
I,
Your
did a lot
closet
of things.
saga.
yeah.
I wish I had something to add to this conversation, but I've been such a shitbag of a person that I've been trying to get better every week. So
Ah, lame.
sorry. Um, but I'm also excited for this Ghost movie.
Oh, you're a fan?
No, but you know,
Fair
sure.
enough. I mean, I
can-
can't. I highly recommend. Absolutely love them. I got my first tattoo because of that band.
I actually saw a lot of Ghost, the band, shirts this weekend, which was surprising. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
kind of
There-
odd that
there's
you
a-
brought them up because
There's a big overlap between
Yeah.
the enjoyers of several things and Ghost enjoyers. True crime and horror definitely being one of them.
yes,
So yeah, friggin' check them out. I'll always shill for Ghost, even though they pay me nothing.
maybe one day.
If only. If only. But with all of that being said, thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us and talking about all these super interesting things. This was really freaking cool. So again, thank
It was a lot
you
of
so
fun.
very much.
Thank you,
We-
Thank you.
and,
That's
a,
what we
Thanks for
love to
having me.
hear.
and a big
Oh,
shout.
totally. And
I was going to say big shout out to last podcast on the left.
oh, we love Last Podcast on the Left. Henry Zabrowski was our guest for our 150th episode.
I personally can't listen to them, and people say, "Well, why not?" And I'm like, they're essentially three captains. You know, Nick's like the straight guy with giving the good information and great research.
Mhm.
I'm the guy that is listening and sometimes chimes in with the inappropriate comments. And they got three guys that are great at the inappropriate comments. And sometimes it's like 20 minutes of who can one up the next guy.
Yeah, there are a lot of bits in your average Last Podcast episode, but no, we do love those guys.
Yeah.
So
Actually, I first heard of Last Podcast on your guys' podcast.
yes,
sorry.
and then she introduced me to Last Podcast on the Left. So it all comes
Yeah.
together.
I do want to mention though that one of my favorite parts about one of my favorite things on True Crime Garage is when Captain, you make some sort of joke and Nick just continues as though he doesn't hear you.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't think he can hear me, and I think other times I think people don't understand. Like the amount of research that he's done for
Yeah.
each case, and he's showing up with a pile of information. So I think he knows, like, you can't encourage me, so you have to just keep moving forward, because if not, we would every case would be like 4 or 5 episodes. So it's
I do find him to be a funny guy. I don't, I think people get the impression that I just don't find him to be, that I don't like his brand of comedy. I do. The Captain's more correct, where it's like you show up and there's a whole bunch of stuff. We're only going to fit so
a lot
much
to get
into
through.
the show, so
Yep.
we keep on rolling too. And
Oh,
the other thing too is I do this weird thing. And he knows that sometimes I'm a little on edge when we're recording, but I do this weird thing where I pretend like the victim or the victim's family is like looking over my shoulder while we're recording. So that like puts me in a different headspace. And I don't know why I can't shake that. I can shake it sometimes, but not most days.
Well, a misconception is, if you listen to the show like that, I'm the fun party guy. And it's actually reversed in real life. Nick is actually the fun party guy. But I also think it's like, if you go to sometimes if you go to a funeral and everybody's being too serious, sometimes you either try to match the mood or you counterbalance the mood. And so we just kind of have assumed these roles, and there's obviously some but I think it's because when he comes over to record and he's so intense and so focused that I'm almost trying to break the tension that's in the room as well. And Nick can be as inappropriate as even more so than me sometimes, but just not on the show. So, I hate to break everybody's dreams out there of, oh man, it'd be great to have a beer with the Captain, but it's like, nah, if you want to have a beer, pick that guy. You have a lot more fun.
I don't know if we really have roles, Brooks, other than you kind of being podcast Googler. I think it's literally just yap hours.
I feel like
We
I'm
both
more.
just do that.
I feel like I'm less fun sometimes because I'm a little too logical. But that's why I usually delineate, like, all right, here's the logical answer, but then here's the fun one if I ignore reality.
Right.
That's a skill in and of itself.
Well, we appreciate you having us on, and good luck to you. You got many episodes to catch up.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Guess we'll have to start
I'll
really
continue
thinking about
listening
more
to you guys every
questions.
week.
Yeah, let us know when you hit 500.
We will do our best. And as always, y'all are welcome back whenever. And now I got to turn it over to our producer, Chris, for end credits and stuff. But as always, thank you for fighting with us, friends. We appreciate each and every single one of you. And we will see you again next week. And now this is the fun part where, because I'm not in control of the board anymore the way I used to.
Podcast was hosted by Bridget Kelly and Dr. Sarah Brooks, featuring special guests Nick and the Captain of True Crime Garage. You can find other episodes of the podcast on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your other favorite listening platform. Follow us on Twitter at brkelly98, at @AndSarahSaid, and check out truecrimegarage.com for more from Nick and the Captain. Rate and review us on your podcatcher of choice. Like, comment, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch and Facebook, and join our Discord community using the links in the description. You can also help support us via the Acast supporter feature, or consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to episodes and fun bonus content. Thanks for listening!